My name is Annie Hunt Burriss. Annie, I'm named for my grandmother. It really is my name, Annie, and Hunt is my maiden name. And I was very proud to be a Hunt. And so when I got married, I added Burriss, didn't hyphenate because I'm not British royalty. You ask what shapes one's life. I think timing is everything. I have been very fortunate in my life. I was born to wonderful families. I was very much loved. Timing was great from a professional standpoint, an educational standpoint, which manifests in being on the bleeding edge a lot of times, but also the leading edge. And I have been really, I guess what I've been most lucky about is I've had 3 acts in life professionally, and that is economic development, the whole realm of attracting great jobs for Georgians, and then backing into higher education, which is all about enabling talent. And now I'm having a good run with trying the corporate arena and figuring out how to make money through a lot of partnerships. So timing is everything. So once upon a time, there was an architect in Elberton, Georgia, the granite capital of the world, and his wife, who was a home economist at Georgia Power until she got married, because then she could not be a home economist because she was married. And they had 3 children. And I was fortunate to be the middle child and grew up between 2 brothers that both are over 6 feet tall, and I'm 5'2". So they kept me humble, but they also prepared me for the world. My father is, if I think of someone with integrity, I had a great role model. His name is James Matthews Hunt, Sr. He was the youngest of 6 kids. He grew up in a family of entrepreneurs in Elbert County. He was a 7th generation Elbert Countian. Revolutionary War land grants brought the Hunts from Virginia to Georgia, and but he was the first in his family to go to college. And he got to do that by playing football for Clemson. He was a size 52 suit guy, a big dude, offensive lineman, and I just have great respect for him because besides football opening the doors for him, his senior year at Clemson, which was a military college then, in the late 30s, said, "Mr. Hunt, do you want to be a football player or an architect? You got a choice, and you have to make it now." And he decided he wanted to be an architect, so he took on a whole bunch of part-time jobs and worked his way through. And so he was a role model for me later on in my life for how to go about getting things done. He was a doer. He was involved in one of the first public housing projects in the country. In fact, the project number was number 1. It was Charleston, South Carolina. A lot of us think of Techwood Homes being one of the first, but it was a passion for him because he grew up seeing how many people in the Deep South didn't have good housing, didn't have indoor plumbing or electricity, and in fact, his family home burned down when he was 5 years old, and it made him forever someone that was into brick and that sort of thing. He wanted to create good quality environments for people to flourish in. He also was, you're into military, he definitely was. He was in the Corps of Engineers, Combat Corps of Engineers, and spent 4 years in the Pacific. In the worst of the battles, you name all the worst ones, and he was there helping to figure out where to help land people, and that his relationships there manifest later on when he became one of the first architects for Marriott. His major, and he was the captain for, became the first COO, CFO of Marriott. And when they decided to build their 5th Marriott in the world, it was Atlanta, Georgia, and they hired my daddy to do that. And he did the 6th one in, I think it was Philadelphia, and then the 7th was Chicago. And that helped put all of us through college and camp, and because an architect is often someone that is on the leading, bleeding edge of the economy. But anyway, relationships matter. That was something else he taught me. My mother was also a similar family background, Revolutionary War land grants to Wilkes County and Hart County, Georgia, and but she came from a different ilk. Her mother went to college, and several of her aunts did, and they were part of that generation that were teachers. They were fascinating women, but my grandfather was the other part of the Old South in that the man she married was, he got to work, he got to go to school every other year. And among his 13 siblings, they paired up every other year to get to go to school. So he was in the 8th grade when he had my grandmother as his teacher, and he was 21 years old. But he was just part of that generation that worked hard, and they produced 4 kids, and my mother was the third, and all of them went to college and did well from that standpoint. So your parents shape your lives, your grandparents shape your lives. So my grandfather on the Hunt side owned a lot of properties and grocery store businesses. Every son had a grocery store business, and on my mother's side it was the farming. I'm the middle child, and as my father used to introduce me, I was his oldest daughter and his youngest daughter. And my father treated me just like my brothers. I learned how to pitch a football pretty well. I was pretty good in art. I liked drawing, and I had to do my share of drafting, just like my brothers, except I could not take drafting in high school. The girls were not allowed to do that in Georgia at that time. But I also did construction inspection with him, and then I became sort of his little hostess. His engineers and blueprint companies were all in Atlanta, so I was a pretty good student, so he would take me out of school and take me into Atlanta, and I would go with him to meet his clients. And I would be the little hostess at Fan and Bill's restaurant and Coach and Six, some of the old Herons, some of the great old restaurants of Atlanta in the 60s and 70s. And he demanded a lot, he expected a lot, but I was the only girl in those meetings. And he just kept saying, you can do anything you set your mind to do. When he was very supportive of my mother, who did a lot of civic engagement activities, and they both really encouraged me to do things like Girl Scouts. I earned every damn badge there was because my mother's my Girl Scout leader, and by golly, her daughter was going to do that. When I expressed interest in music, they were totally supportive in that, and oboe and piano and things like that. And that just opened up my world in so many ways. We were brought into, under great secrecy, to come to hear the Atlanta version of the Metropolitan Opera when they came to town. We were sworn to secrecy because people in my hometown would have made fun of my dad for loving opera. And my brothers hated it, but I loved it too. So they were very supportive when I got involved in student government, which was a very pivotal point in my life. My senior year of high school in Georgia was the first year of total integration. And so I was elected, much to my surprise, to be the white president from the white high school, merging with the black high school. And in Georgia, often it was 8 through 12, and that year the black schools often became a middle school, and the high school, the white school, became the high school of 10 through 12. So that was the case in 1970-71, and I was very fortunate that we had a great principal and a great dean of students, and they encouraged Robert Thurman and me, he was the black, in fact, they set up everything, and my parents helped support it, as well as a network of good, quiet friends behind the scenes. So that Robert, and the summer before we started the fall year, every Wednesday night we had a cookout behind the high school gym, and Robert and I flipped hamburgers and hot dogs, And the group invited were the student body officers, the class officers, and the presidents of clubs that were being merged. And it was kind of dicey initially, but by the end of the summer, the leaders knew each other. And when we came together, it was, we did all right because leaders passed down that this is a good person to know and to work with, and reliable communications permit progress. It's straight out of the Bible, but it's very true. So in Elberton, with 5,000 people in a county of 18,000, which is still about the same size, the granite capital of the world, we had no problems. The only problem I personally experienced was some of my family, my father's siblings, were very upset that my picture was in the newspaper with a black guy. But my parents were very supportive, and they said, God created us all, and there's no difference, just pigmentation, and it's your job to help make this work. And so it was a scary and exhilarating time, but a great growth opportunity. And in fact, I'm thinking I'd like to go find the people that were in that similar role. And I know of two others. I met them at student government training at Berry College that summer. And one is Michael Thurman, who has done a wonderful job. He was the co-president from the Black Schools in Athens. And then DuBose Porter was for Dublin, Georgia. And I'm interested to see what's happened and how it's coming up on 50 years, how those things worked and didn't work. Augusta, Georgia didn't do things like this, and 6 people were killed, if my memory serves me correctly. I think there are a lot of parallels right now, and if we're not comfortable with people that are different than ourselves or perceived to be different than ourselves, because God doesn't make any junk. Another way that my parents were really helpful is they learned from their life experiences. My father was, as you know, in the military, and he was so stunned by his experience, 4 years in the Pacific, where he was out of the South for the first time, and he was with people from all over the United States. And he was convinced that part of our education was to be exposed to people from other parts of the country, not just Southerners in the way Southerners thought. And this was amplified by him being the first Southerner to be on the National Registration Board for Architects. He was viewed as a leader by them. Anyway, Dad believed that we needed to be part of the decision making, so I thought I wanted to go to Georgetown. And he said, you may go look at Georgetown as long as you go look at the places I want you to look at. And about the 4th Women's College, which happened to be Queens in Charlotte, North Carolina, I refused to get out of the car. I said, okay, I got it. You're trying to make me go to a women's college, and I don't want to do that. And he said, you know what? About 51.7% or 52% of the world's population are female. And if you learn how to get along with them, you're going to be much better. But at the time, I couldn't have gone to a place like Davidson. I couldn't have gone to Harvard. I would have had to go to Radcliffe. Within a year or two, that changed. But at my pivotal time in '71, you didn't have that opportunity. So he took me to this little 2-year women's college in Bristol, Virginia, called Sullins College, where he had dated some girls from there. He didn't tell my mother that at the time. But when I got out, he said, you're going to know when you get to the right place, and it's just going to feel right to you. And I knew there. But I also thought in my mind's eye, okay, I'm going to do my 2-year gig, and I'm out of here, and then I'll go where I want to go. But it was a wonderful experience because Sullins, this tiny 350 student school, had women roughly from 35 states and 5 or 6 foreign countries, which was a really diverse mix. And there I think they were pretty leading edge of focusing on a solid humanities education. I hate to use the word liberal arts because I think liberal has a very different meaning these days, but it was a very balanced, collaborative, everything was in sequence. So you got the history of the world combined with the arts and with the sciences, and it was exhilarating to me, and it was just a good base to build upon, always with the idea that critical thinking skills and expressing yourself and your value system were really important. Sullins was also important to me because it, in that environment, I was given leadership opportunities. I was lucky in a bunch of them. One of them, I was the vice president of student body, and then the president of student body got caught smoking marijuana, and she got ousted, and so I became the president of student body, which meant I got exposed to sex. Sullins was getting recalibrated. This is a terrible story, but it was, my parents are both gone, so maybe they won't know about it. Bristol, Virginia was a place where there were a lot of race car drivers, and some of us went to the NASCAR race at Bristol. And I must confess that I got a little inebriated and drinking scotch with diluted by rain, and got back to the dorms, and I was supposed to go to dinner that night representing Sullins College at the Sachs reaccreditation dinner. And Dr. Pritchett picked me up and he said, "Oh my goodness, Annie, you are inebriated." And I said, "Yes, I am." And so we went and tried to sober up with a lot of coffee and went to this wonderful dinner. But one of the most humbling experiences of my life is I was cutting my filet mignon and it went over into the lap of the president of Vanderbilt University. And this is when I learned, no, you do not mix your alcohol with your responsibilities. So my dad had emphasized to us that it was important to understand other regions. And I had my younger brother, who's the smartest of all of us, just brilliant. He was a wild child, and I was about the only one who had any influence over him. And I had been to a fraternity party out in Fulton, Missouri, the Simcoe White Russell, and Daddy said I could go to that as long as I went and checked out Stevens College in Columbia, Missouri, where he'd wanted me to go in the first place. And so I said, you know what, I think Westminster would be great for Howard, and it was where Winston Churchill had done his famous Iron Curtain speech. And I really liked Stevens. It had the studio arts that I was interested in, and also the art history, which I was interested in. It was College Town, USA, with University of Missouri there. And so Dad said, okay, you two can go. Because he said, the people I enjoyed most in the military were people that were out of the Midwest. They're just rock solid people. They tend to be, they've come out of farming roots. They're show me state. You got to think when you go there. And he was also a big fan of Harry Truman for doing the right things for the right reasons. So in 73 to 75, I went to school at Stevens, and there I earned my Bachelor of Fine Arts, which complemented the Associate of Fine Arts from Sullins. There, I also received wonderful leadership opportunities. I don't remember how, but I became the senior class representative to the Board of Trustees. And that was a fascinating opportunity. Mr. Pillsbury of Pillsbury was chairman of the board, and I remember at one meeting he said, "Annie, come here, sit down next to me. And you will get this because of higher ed." It certainly came back to enlighten my thought process about higher ed money. And he was sketching out on a napkin. And at the time, Stevens had 1,200 students, and he said, we have got to grow this school to 2,000 students because the price points work for, you know, there's a certain amount of cost and benefits to running an operation, and you really needed 2,000 students to make it work. And I thought, wow, I never thought about anything like that, but it was just wonderful because I had access to, I was given, I don't know why that door opened, but it was one that I went through, and it was wonderful. While I was at Stevens, I was able to go to the University of Missouri to take those drafting courses I always wanted to take and was not allowed to in Georgia. And while there, the professor said, you know, there's a great book. Since your daddy was an architect, you might want to read a book called The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. And I did, and man, when I read that, I thought, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to be an architect just like my dad. And I really liked the model of integrity in there. And so it was also the 70s when we'd already had a bad energy crunch. And I remember a number of my father's clients bankrupted on him, headquarters projects that were, you know, big name companies that, and I thought, you know, Dad worked his way through college, I can do that. And so I called up Georgia Tech and I said, I plan to come there to do a second undergraduate. I'm an in-state student and I will need help working my way through, and I've already been responsible for a dorm here, so I'd like to do that there. And, you know, just, and much to, I mean, they accepted me. I had pretty good grades, and I did not know at the time girls didn't go there. I called my dad and I said, guess what, Dad, I'm going to be an architect just like you. And he said, well, that's a very good thing. And what are you thinking about doing? I said, I'm not expecting you to pay for it. You've given me a wonderful education and great travels. And I said, I intend to work my way through. And he said, and I'm going to Georgia Tech. And he said, I think you need to rethink that. They're really not producing very good architects right now. And he was on the state registration and the national registration board at the time. And I said, oh, you're just saying that because you don't like them because of football. Because, you know, I grew up every Saturday possible in Death Valley, Clemson, and I remember those Georgia Tech Clemson games. And he said, no, that's not it. He said, I think you need to lift your aspirations. You need to consider going to a place like University of Pennsylvania or Yale or Harvard. The design programs are, he said, I don't think MIT is a good fit for you. But I said, well, that's too bad because I'm working my way through and I've already got it all set up, and I'm going to Georgia Tech. And once I got to Georgia Tech, I understood why. One of my 20 million part-time jobs, besides being responsible for first a floor and then a dorm, was I worked in the registrar's office. And back then, the computers were the size of a room like this. And so student assistants would help paste grades in, you know, you transfer them onto the grade cards. And so I worked for the secretary to the registrar. And that's how I found out that in 1975, 1 out of 13 undergrads was a female and 1 out of 21 was a graduate student. And I came in as a hybrid. I was pursuing a second undergraduate in architecture, but I was able to also pursue graduate courses because of my mixed background. So Georgia Tech was a great growth opportunity. I'm glad I had 2 brothers, and I'm really glad I had the experiences of going to women's colleges because I think I probably would have flunked out. I nearly did. That is a story in itself, but I guess the best example I can give, it made me understand the world of African Americans a lot better, is I went into a graduate course in acoustical design, and the professor said, what are you doing here? The second day of classes, he said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm here to learn. And he said, not my class. I said, why not? I paid my tuition, I've got my books. I don't teach girls, out of here. And I thought, what did I do wrong? I had done all the right stuff, and I went to my part-time job in the registrar. I cried my eyes out, thinking like a girl, because girls do think differently than guys. That I thought, I must have done something wrong. It couldn't have been him. It's got to be me. And I was just crying my eyes out, and Mrs. Bell said, I'm going to go in and tell Mr. Roper about this, the registrar. And he came out and got me, and I didn't want them to see me crying, but he had me repeat the story, and he said, you didn't do anything wrong. You just go right back to class on Thursday, and it's going to be fine. And it was, but there was a bitterness that had to be overcome. And it's sort of like in my first design class, the professors going around the room. There was one other guy that was a second undergraduate. He'd gone to Sewanee, so he became easily one of my best friends quickly because he had that humanities background too. But the professor stopped. I mean, he wanted us to tell who we were, where we were from, and what we were interested in. And so I said, I'm Annie Hunt from Elberton, Georgia, and a second undergraduate. My dad's an architect. And his demeanor went, he said, is your dad James Hunt? And I said, yeah, he is. And he said, okay. And I felt a chill factor. So that night, I went to the expenditure of calling my daddy. Like, I said, I got this professor, and he was really cool with me until I told him your name, and I'm really proud to be your daughter. And he said, oh, I'm so sorry you got him. He said, he came up for his professional architectural registration, and I was the board member that said, he has not had sufficient professional experience. He's got all academic experience, and you have to have, so many hours. So he said, you're starting out on the low end on that one. And it was a good growth opportunity. But then I had very supportive professors too, and I want to tell you about two. One was Arthur Frank Beckham. He was an architectural history professor, pretty round, very proper. Came out of the Ivies, and there were like 200 people in his class, and I was scared to death the first time I walked in. I didn't see any girls in there. And I thought, oh my gosh. And the only empty seats were in the back of the classroom. There were some down at the very front, so I just screwed my courage to the sticking place and walked right down front. And afterwards, he was just a neat guy. I thought he was brilliant in the way he wove together, the history of architecture with the cultures and the politics and the sciences of the eras. And we became friends, though I was scared to death of Arthur Frank Beckham because he was so proper. Anyway, at one point he said, I understand that you are working your way through school. And I said, yes, sir, I am. He said, would you like the chance to earn an honorarium? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, well, Philip Schutze, who is just a phenomenal architect, bringing classics to Atlanta. He said, he designed the Swan House, which is next door to the Atlanta History. And he said, the architectural drawings are just in tatters now. He said, I believe I could get you a job of recreating it on whiteboards so that it could be a permanent display. He said, it's really interesting, the construction of the building, so the outside is equidistant, yet the rooms are also equal inside, and that, that was just engineering of these plaster walls. And to make a long story short, I got that in the honorarium, and it just, I appreciated him understanding I was working so hard to work my way through. And then fast forward to my second year, I was able to take a graduate course in construction inspection because of all my experiences with my dad. And in fact, he said, go take this course from Ike Supporta because he actually learned from Corbusier and Walter Gropius, the great architects of our time. And so long story short, I became one of his students, and his daughter is Maria Supporta, who subsequently has become a good friend. But that construction inspection course required us to go once a week with him to inspect construction underway, but we also had to secure a property that we went to ourselves every week and recorded it. And I soon found out every site, there were not that many construction projects in Atlanta, major construction, because of the recession. But I also discovered that no contractor wanted me on their site because girls were viewed as bad luck, really bad luck. And I was coming up on when I had to turn in where I was going. I had applied to 6 or 7 places. So I finally called Daddy. I said, I hate to be on your coattails, but you got to help me here. Who is somebody that could help me get on a site? And he said, okay, there's one guy, and you have to be prepared for the following. His name is Larry Gillerstadt. It's Burriss Construction. You have to call him between 5:15 a.m. and 5:30 a.m. You have to get everything said in 30 seconds, and do not be surprised if he doesn't hang up on you without saying goodbye. So I practice. I got my thoughts down pretty succinctly, and I did use my father's name because they had done work together on the first Marriott. That was Larry Gillerstadt's first big project I came to learn about years later. I said, I just can't get on any site, and if I can't do that, I said, you know my dad, and you know how he would be, and I promise you, if you will let me on any of your construction sites, I will come in overalls and my hair up and a hat, hard hat up, and they'll never know I'm a girl. Never know I'm a girl. He said, okay, somebody will call you back, probably by tomorrow. And he did get me onto a construction site at Emory University. I didn't have time to say, how am I going to get over there? Because I didn't have a car. I was taking MARTA bus or riding my bike. And, things have a way of working out. But I appreciated his kindness for giving me a break. I didn't know that girls were such bad luck. But I made an A in that course, so I was proud of that. So let's fast forward to Rufus Hughes, who is my design professor, and he's a phenomenal human being. At one point in the School of Eternal Light, because when you go to architecture school, you have to pull out projects, and you didn't get much sleep in that school. Fortunately, I'm somebody that didn't need but about 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night, sort of like my dad. But anyway, Rufus said, let's catch a Coke together. And he said, Annie, you can do architecture. I don't have any doubt about it. You've got a great sense of color, you got a sense of history, you got a sense of, all the multidisciplinary aspects, which is what an architect is. They are like a conductor for an orchestra. They are that for construction. He said, but there's something that's just not right. And I don't know what the gap is. It may be a third dimension, an understanding of third dimensions. But here's what I want you to do. I've made arrangements for you to go take tests at the counseling center. And he said, you got really good strengths. He said, this is not it. I don't know what is, or I would tell you what I think it is. But go take these tests. And so I did. And on my male side, it said that I should be a pastor. Well, I didn't know any women pastors at that point. Number 2 is a lawyer. I knew no women lawyers. Number 5 was to be an architect. And on my female side, it was dean of students. And I thought, no way, you got to go get a doctorate. There's no way I want to go get a doctorate at this point in my life. I've enjoyed college about as much as I want to. But somehow they came up with the thing that, you have a multidisciplinary mind. You enjoy those intersections, those collaborations, like architects do. Why not go into city planning? That was a professional degree in the College of Architecture, and so I did. But in the meantime, I thought, okay, as I segue into that, I think I'm going to go try to get a job through the governor's intern program, because I was working my way through, and there was a pretty good internship stipend if you got the graduate one. So I went down to the governor's office and I said, I want an internship doing with energy and architecture. And they said, we don't have anything in that, but we do have something with energy and transportation. And I went, gross. And they said, well, there's a guy by the name of Peyton Hawes who is the state DOT board member for the 5th Congressional Atlanta. And he's trying to figure out what to do with the Great Park because Jimmy Carter stopped the Stone Mountain Freeway going through town, and they're trying to figure out what to do with the land. And we've sent a bunch of people over to interview with him, and he's not selected anybody. Would you go try? And I said, yeah, because you know what? He grew up in Elberton, Georgia. And I don't know him personally, but his sister was my 5th grade teacher, and she went to Stevens, and that's why I went to Stevens. And anyway, long story short, I went and interviewed, and he offered me the job. And I said, well, I will not accept it unless it is as a graduate student, because I can't afford. And he said, okay. And I said, and I need to structure this so I can get credits for it. And he said, okay. So I went back to my professors and was able to engineer 15 hours of quarter credits on that. And then and we signed a contract. And then I got a call from Peyton. He said, Annie, he was a great attorney in this town. He said, I don't know what to say except to tell you straight. Tom Moreland, Commissioner of DOT, just called me and said, you can't have an intern. You've got 6,000 employees at your disposal. And I said, but Mr. Hawes, a contract has been signed, and I have got all these course credits lined up for it. And he said, I can make an appointment for you with Tom Moreland. So I called Mr. Moreland. I thought he was just a damn bureaucrat getting in my way. So I called him and I said, you know, a contract has been signed and I'm eager to fulfill my part of it. I'm glad to Xerox, make coffee, do whatever needs to be done, but I'm fully expecting you to honor this. And he said, well, young lady, you come down here and there's maybe 3 different options I could offer you. And to make a long story short, I ended up taking the one working for John Hassel, and it was in policy planning. And it was the convergence of politics. It was state money, working with the legislature, and federal money. And it was engineering, and I was starting to take civil engineering. And long story short, it was wonderful. And I had to read the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, Engineering News Record, and do a little clip service for the commissioner, and I got to work with the legislature, and then they offered me a job in the summer, a full-time, so I was, instead of starving, eating an apple with peanut butter 3 times a day as my diet, I was able to have money for once. So they suggested that I apply for a federal highway fellowship, and I got lucky, and I was awarded one, and it was a lot of money back then. It'd be about $50,000 now, and then because I was awarded that fellowship, I did my city planning focused on transportation. So I took a lot of civil engineering, port design, and airport design, and a whole host of things. And when I got done, they said, you have a 4-year commitment to work for us now, which was all right, you know, because it was a pretty good job. So this is another story of how, at the time I was just bewildered, but Commissioner Moreland, who had made me cry an awful lot, but he never knew I was crying. I went to the little girl's room and cried, because I and the secretary were the only women engaged at this level. I worked help him staff the board and go work with the Georgia General Assembly, which there were not many girls that did that then. Anyway, he said, go down and see the HR people and get lined up. We want you to work here. And he said, in fact, I want you to be section chief for the policy planning group, because John Hassel, who was a fabulous boss, had gone to Washington with Jimmy Carter at that point and ultimately became head of the Federal Highway Administration. Anyway, I go in to see Thurl Brown, and he said, Annie, you've just done a great job. We like what you're doing with the legislature and the template you set up for tract bills. And so we're pleased to offer you a full-time position as a planner for $14,000 a year. And I said, now Thurl, somebody that I'm in school with at Georgia Tech that is getting the exact same degree as me, who has no work experience, you have just offered him $18,000 a year. And he's a friend of mine. So why? What's the difference? I have work experience. You know me. You don't know him. He's a great guy. He's a good choice. But I don't understand this difference. And he said, well, he's got a wife and a child to support, and you don't. You're not married. And I said, now, Thurl, the principle of the matter is you're paying me to do the work and you're paying him to do the work. The wife and child are not involved. That's irrelevant to this case. And I said, I expect at least $18,000, which I should have asked for more. But we had several weeks of negotiating and finally came in at $18,000. But I should have made more. I should have stood my ground more. But that was I think it always became important to me afterwards to pay the individual for what their work was and not judge the book by its cover. DOT was great to me, had a lot of wonderful opportunities, got married there. All the men thought I would become Annie Burriss, and I said, no, I'm Annie Hunt Burriss. And they said, no, you're not, you're Annie Burriss. I said, no, I'm proud to be a Hunt. I am proud to be a Hunt. And I'm adding on, I'm not losing anything, and I'm not British royalty, so I'm not dashing it, you know. And I've had to stand my ground about that, but it's my name, okay? and maybe I could let go of it now, but I am proud to be my daddy's daughter. It kind of tickles me now because people don't know what to call me, and they call me Annie Hunt a lot of times, like Annie Ruth, Annie Mae. But I kind of enjoy that. Anyway, they still had me go into the legislature, and then happily Woody and I found out that we were expecting. I'd had some job offers, but I thought, it's not the time to change. And I really, nobody had been pregnant there except secretaries. And so I really thought long and hard about how do I handle this? Well, fortunately, I'm pretty healthy, and I had a ton of sick leave. So I went to Moreland first, and I said, here's the great news, and this is what I'm going to do. I said, I'm going to take 3 months of maternity leave, and the 4th month, I'm going to stage it back so it's good for everybody, and I've got the leave, and so that's what I'm going to do. You're okay with that, right? And he said, okay, and because he said okay, everybody else had to do it too. But so that worked out well, but then an opportunity came to be part of the Atlanta Regional Commission. They wanted a planner that understood transportation, and I had been going to the MARTA board meetings for Tom Moreland, and the Atlanta Hartsfield planning meetings is his person, and so I had to have somebody to give me a recommendation. So I called the Governor's Office of Planning and Development because, this is an even better story. When I worked for Tom Moreland, it was when Governor George Busby was governor. And I ended up working with the Governor's Office a great deal because George Busby was chair of the Transportation Committee for the National Governors Association. And so we came up with policy, and I was able to use some of my policy work from my graduate courses. And I had done a study of Georgia and then the 50 states and the impact of energy on transportation funding and what policies we might pursue. And this is when I lost all respect for government. They used my executive summary statement as policy for the National Governors Association. I thought, a governor should write his own work. I mean, here I'm 20-something years old, and I didn't know that governors didn't really do their own writing. But so back to the Atlanta Regional Commission job, they called to check my references in the governor's office, and the governor's office called me and they said, we had no idea you'd ever leave DOT, that you just seem so happy and love it there. We've got an opening over here. And to make a long story short, I went to that with Tom Moreland's blessing to be the grunt staffer for the first Governor's Economic Development Council. And it was cool because I got to do planning, and I was paired up with a budget analyst for Georgia Department of Industry, Trade at the time, Community Affairs, Forestry, Jekyll Island, and I was the grunt staffer for the Georgia Dome project. And in that role, I got to meet all the key leaders, and I brought in these people to brief the council members who were composed of the agency heads so they could understand all the dynamics in the projects and what kind of funding was really needed. And as a result of that, I was offered the opportunity to go work with George Berry, but I have to go back to George Berry. He'll die with this story, but he's laughed about it. When I was on maternity leave, about 6 months earlier, my good friend Dan Ebersol, who eventually became the treasurer of Georgia, called me up and he said, you're going to kill that baby on maternity leave, so I need you to go to this luncheon with me and give the baby a break. And he said, I just, in my gut, feel like this is something that you would be good in. So we went to hear the new Commissioner of Industry and Trade, George Berry, speak. And I said, I know him, from afar because he was the person that built Hartsfield Airport under budget and ahead of schedule. And DOT signage and all that stuff, I had responsibilities for them. So he gives this talk at this luncheon, and I felt my heart go right into my throat, and I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to do economic development. It's the convergence of all these things that I've studied. It's culture, it's history, it's the arts, it's civil engineering, it's architecture, it's city planning. And afterwards, Dan waited with me, and I was the last person to be in line to see George. I said, I love what you do. It's what I want to do. If you got any openings, please consider me. And he, you know, he's a big dude. And he looked out at me and peered at me, and he said, you can't do that. And I said, why not? And he said, because there aren't any girls that do this. And I said, well, at some point you will probably need someone, and I'm pretty qualified. And please keep me in mind. And, you know, within 9 months I was working for him. I was really lucky he invited Deborah Lonis, who had a tourism background, but also construction with the Japanese background. And so it was the leading bleeding edge in 1984 that I was allowed to pioneer in that area. And back then it was industrial development. And so I just had a blast figuring out, you know, I thought if I could help a company find a location that was successful for them, they could bring good jobs. And I always had Hayhara in my mind. You know, imagine a little town like Hayhara getting good jobs, and somebody getting a good job, and their kid getting a bike under their Christmas tree they never would have had otherwise. Years later, that came true for me with ICAP, but I'm ahead of the story. Anyway, it was fun, and I decided I thought the South was really changing a lot, and because of Hartsville, that was and of course transportation is the cardiovascular system of the economy. I thought we had a strategic advantage no one else had, and we were starting to get international flights. So Mr. Berry let me go recruit international banks out of New York City. My philosophy was if we got the banks, they would bring their customers with them, and I targeted the international flights coming in. And I just had a blast. It was exhilarating to do that. And I also started focusing on the other strategic strengths that made Atlanta different from our competitors, and that was our research universities were really pretty good. Georgia Tech had taken a different turn. It had come through the mindset of it. Was it going to be a respectable regional engineering school, or was it going to become international and first-class research university? And it had made that move. And then the great money of Coca-Cola had helped both Georgia Tech and Emory really step up. And then George Berry one morning came to me and he said, tomorrow morning I need you to be at a breakfast meeting. I need you to be on time. And you'll be the only female there, and don't embarrass me. So I was there, and it was at SunTrust, trust company then. And it was an amazing opportunity he gave me. It was sort of that core of quiet leaders behind the scenes in banking and civic leaders. And the project was to go after the headquarters of the American Cancer Society. It had become a national project. Atlanta was not being considered because the relocation consultants, which were the best in the world at the time, Fanis out of Chicago, said, Cancer Society, you need to leave New York City. It's too expensive. You've done well the first 75 years of your existence, but you need to go to somewhere else. And your corporate board is who's who of corporate America. You need to make it easy for those CEOs to get to you. So you need to be in the central time zone. You need to purchase an existing building. And you need to not be near any federal installation that could prejudice research dollars coming in. Because the Cancer Society, if you look at history, they have funded more pre-Nobel laureates than anybody. So most prestigious nonprofit in the world at that time. So they said, we want to go after them. And the chairman of the board was actually from Atlanta, and he said, we're going to have to really work hard on this. But George Berry said, good, Annie is my project manager on this, and we will connect her up with the Atlanta Chamber, Roy Cooper. And long story short, we were able to convince them that, you know, you don't need to be in the central time zone. Atlanta's actually west of Detroit, so blow that away. Atlanta was red hot right then for economic development. We had no buildings you could buy, so I was able to go in and see the board members and say, gentlemen, these were all top-line CEOs. I said, you are elegant dressers, and I would be willing to bet that you all have on custom tailored suits, which is it's a big investment, but it's a wise investment because it goes with your body type, and it'll probably last you 20 years versus 2 or 3 years with a rack suit. And I said, so you really need to have a custom designed building so that it doesn't look too luxurious, but it really functions for this nonprofit headquarters. And if you come to Atlanta, you're right there with the World Center of Epidemiology with the CDC. And I think that there's philanthropic support for you to be right across the street from them and next door to Emory, and we can make this work. And that is what we ended up doing. That project was a lot of fun for these 2 insider insights that few people know. We were competing against other states where the governors were very much engaged. Not that Joe Frank Harris wasn't. He was a great governor. More jobs got created under him than any governor before or since. Net new jobs, 880,000. But he was a teetotaler. And these other governors, man, they were whining and dining. I mean, because they wanted these CEOs to come also bring industry to their states. And so I said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to have breakfasts at the governor's mansion, and there's no alcohol involved. And Roy Cooper and I set up a group of 50 leading citizens of Atlanta. Roy was one of these great leaders behind the scenes who was head of economic development for the Atlanta Chamber for 30-something years, one of the most humble men, but everybody respected him and would take his calls. And so we went to the major banks first and said, would you be one of our 50 leading citizens to wine and dine these CEOs when they come in? And nobody turned us down of this 50 leading citizens. So as the different parties came in, this was about 86, 87, they got wine and dine. It was a great win-win situation for everybody. But we were really coming down to the hatch of, there was a lot of money being offered by Governor Schaefer in Maryland, and I don't remember the governor's name in Texas, but in Colorado, they were all gunning for this project. And Roy and I were sitting around going, there's no money. Georgia does not buy projects. So I think I'm the only person alive that knows this story now. I said, Roy, who was a great libertarian, what's the chance of us getting Delta to be the first airline to be smoke-free, no tobacco on it? This was 87. It was August of 87. And he said, well, first of all, it's not our right to take people smoking away from them. And I said, first of all, why should your smoke be messing up my lungs? And it would save Delta money. I mean, their stewards and stewardesses get sick a lot. I know that from personal friends. And it's a mess to clean up an airline because you've got, the interiors just get really nasty. And I said, what have you got to lose if you call Dave Garrett? And long story short, he picked up the phone and called Dave Garrett. And he said, this is fraught with politics. I can't do it immediately, but I can make you a commitment that we will do that. But you can only tell 2 people. It was the top 2 people at Cancer Society, and tell the governor and the commissioner, George Berry. And so we did. And that is endemic to the kind of civic engagement that great CEOs in Atlanta played at that time, and I think they still do, though it's a different city. It's a couple of million now, we're approaching 7 million. But to his credit, I went back and looked it up because Roy just died, 91 years old. I loved him. We stayed in touch for a long time. He was a Georgia Tech grad who let women come along. He didn't have to, but he did. And I looked up at the record, and indeed, Dave Garrett kept his promise. He retired as CEO, but stayed on the board from 1988 through 94. And he retired from the board of Delta on December 31st, 94. And on January 1, 1995, Delta was the first airline to be smoke-free. And it did tick a lot of people off, especially their business travelers. But if you look at it, all the rest of them were grateful for that. But that indication of what Georgia was willing to do to listen to what the needs were of the American Cancer Society and focus on what was really important to them. You don't have to buy people. You can do a whole lot of different things that make it, find a need and fill it. That's what we did, and that made us successful. So I love those projects. And then one of the people that helped us secure it, I went to Pat Patillo, who was well known for his giving. And I said, you know, we need a warehouse for them. And could you do a tax write-off by building them and donating a 50,000 square foot warehouse for all their printed materials if we got the land for you right there on Clifton Road? And he said, yes. He was a handshake kind of guy. Those are the people I love to work with most. So Pat came back to me and he said, okay, now you've been talking to me about how you're fired up about the CDC and Emory having all this potential with the medical and Georgia Tech with the engineering and that it's the industries of the future, that you feel like textiles are going away and those cheap land, cheap labor, which drives manufacturing, is going offshore. He said, it's time for you to leave the state and you need to come see what it's like on the local level, because all politics is local. So with his support, I went to the DeKalb Chamber of Commerce, which was the second largest chamber in the state at the time, and I was vice president of economic development. And again, I was just lucky. I was lucky in that I had leaders that really supported me there. And so while there, I took delegations to go see what we could do to recruit pharmaceutical industry. We went to France, Germany, Switzerland to go see the home places of industry, and I was able to get in to see and take my delegation to see. And there I had, during that tenure at the DeKalb Chamber, 2 weeks after I birthed my last baby, which was September of '89, we birthed what was called the Clifton Corridor Biomedical Research Council. I was trying to emulate the Silicon Valley, but connect the dots here of how we could be the Clifton Corridor. So we started up this 501c3 and great foundations that I'd worked with in helping to secure the American Cancer Society. They were engaged with that idea and they gave us money to start that up. But the Woodruff, for example, said, we'll give you $500,000 to get this nonprofit going, to connect the dots of business, academia, government, and philanthropy, to grow the biomedical industry. But you have to have an executive director first. And I said, I can't get an executive director without having that 500. They said, no, you have to figure that out. So I went with the former president of the American Cancer Society nationally, Dr. Hamletton, who lived in Atlanta, signed the Cancer Act in '72 with Nixon. And we went to see the head of the CDC, and I said, okay, so business loans executives to government. Can government loan to a nonprofit? We've gotten the 501c3. Can you loan me Eric Green, who is head of your tech transfer? Just, you know, the feds had just started this tech transfer program. And he said, okay. And then the Woodruff gave us money and other foundations gave us money, and we began a very concerted effort to effectively link up business, academia, government, and philanthropy to grow this industry. And it became very evident to me that business and government work together, and government and academia work together, and academia and business often work together, but you needed a three-legged stool to stand up. You've got a ladder is a useful thing where you go in step, 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 but if what you're leaning against falls, you're dead meat. But a three-legged stool or four-legged with the philanthropy, which comes out of business, you know, you could do something. And so that organization is coming up on its 30th year. It was exhilarating. It's now Georgia Bio. I think one of the great highs of my life was in 2008 when Georgia hosted Bio International. And I went to the World Congress Center, and I'm walking around, and there were 17,000 people that had come to Atlanta. And there were all kinds of languages being spoken, but the stream was working. It was great, tourism dollars and great kinds of companies coming out of that. So that was a lot of fun. But when you have a second child, you don't want to manage people. And I did not want to manage people. And Georgia Power came to me about coming to work for them. Now, I had just stolen from the Atlanta Chamber one of their top researchers to come be on my team at the DeKalb Chamber, and she had said, I'm not going to come work for you because you're going to leave as soon as I get here. And I said, no, I promise I won't leave for a year, at least a year, but I won't after that. And you come work for me, and you can work from home because I know what your work ethics are. And computers were starting to come along. And she had small children. So she came to work for me, and right after she came to work for me, Georgia Power came and said, we're offering you this job. And I said, boy, I really wanted to do it because it was a lot more money, and I wouldn't have been managing people, but I'd made a promise to Susan Contreras, and what good are you if you don't honor your word? So happily they came back when my year commitment was up, and I left and went to Georgia Power. And I thought, phew, I can just go back to doing what I love, which is economic development on a broad scale, because Georgia Power, oh my goodness, what a great organization from economic, they've been real pioneers globally in how they do go about that process. And then they said, I've been there about 6 months, and I got called to the senior vice president's office, and he said, Annie, we noticed you have this background in transportation, and we need you to start up electric transportation for us because California is changing the whole dynamic and they're requiring so many electric vehicles in order to, for a car manufacturer to even sell cars in that state. And this is in the early 90s. And we want you to pioneer that for us. And I said, I hate cars. Really don't care about them. And they said, well, we really care. And we understand you still have good relations with DOT. And it dawned on me, oh my goodness, this is what a big corporation is. When they say, we invite you to consider this opportunity, it means you better damn well do it. So it was good that Tom Moreland years ago had said, don't burn any bridges in leaving. You've had some people being really hateful here to you, but just don't do it. And fortunately, I did have really good relations still. And so that was a blast. I found out early on, I had great staff. I had a bunch of engineers that really wanted my job. They loved cars and they loved electric. I could give a rip, but it was fun to me to go network with the electric power companies across the country because they were united in figuring out, oh, how can we tap into this deal? And the car companies were certainly interested. And so I got lucky again in working with these people and going to Detroit and meeting with I quickly figured out, oh my gosh, the car companies are only doing this because they have to if they're going to do sales. So they say they're supporting electric vehicles, but yeah, they have a little dedicated, high dedicated group, but everybody else is trying to kill them off because the industry components, you were going to kill that, the regular car. And so long story short, through my Georgia Tech connections, which fortunately I didn't burn all those bridges either, I found out that there was DARPA money, Department of Defense Advanced Research Programs Administration. And they were very interested in electric vehicles because they did not, they wanted vehicles that you couldn't detect you're going to know this better than me, the heat that comes out of a regular, tank or whatever. They wanted electric tanks. So long story short, with this great support of Georgia Power, I applied for it, created a consortium of 17 states, the Southern Governors Association, which I'd gotten to know when I worked for George Busby, and created a network of where each governor's office and a leading research institution in that state agreed to be part of a partnership, and we applied for almost $9 million grant from DARPA, and we got it. We got it in 6 months. And part of that money went to helping to create a SciTrek exhibit, but also an exhibit that was done nationally to educate people about how electric vehicles work, because you had to get over that comfort, and we had to have better batteries for all that to work. But anyway, that was fabulous. And I had just come back from Boston, where I approved this exhibit. I mean, my peers let me, I took their money. I was glad to take other people's money, and we created this great exhibit out of this group in Boston. And I flew home the next day, and much to my shock, my dad died. And it was a terrible time in my life. It was just, I had never known death. And he lived a great life, and I'm comforted by that. But boy, that was hard. And for a variety of reasons, Georgia Power, they were very supportive of me. And they said, Annie, we want you to go back to economic development, because Georgia Power, you know, the state got the Olympics, and Georgia Power, for the first time ever, there will be an economic development component for the Olympics, and we want you to help shape that and work on that. So it was wonderful. I didn't have to manage 50 people, and I got to work with the small teams and design a concept for what became known as Operation Legacy. And did targets like, I targeted getting the annual meeting for the American Electronics Association, which had never come out of Silicon Valley, but we got them to Atlanta on the hoax of, not the hoax, the opportunity of getting to see the Olympics being put together, the behind the scenes cool stuff. Did the same thing with the automotive manufacturers, because I'd gotten to know them. We had a series of groups. We got the CEOs that Jeff Sonnenberg had at Emory University coming in. We hosted one of their events. So we used the Olympics as a sizzler. People in leadership roles often like to be in the know before everybody else, so we capitalized on that. And the really exciting thing to me is, ever since the Atlanta Olympics, where we didn't lose money, every community since has wanted to do an economic development component, and they've sent delegations back to Georgia, and I think that is a wonderful sharing thing. While I did all that, I got to know Bill Dahlberg, who was president of Georgia Power, and then when he became CEO of Southern Company, he was put on the board of Regents. And Zell Miller had been elected governor, and between them they cooked up this idea that, you know, a great asset of the state that's not been capitalized is the university system. And as we were moving increasingly into a knowledge age where an educated workforce was more important, or increasingly more important than a skilled workforce, they thought, we need to create a position in this. And I was lucky. I interviewed against a bunch of guys and got picked for this. Though it had its interesting twists. They offered me the job. I excitedly accepted. About a week after I accepted, Tom Daniel, who worked directly for the chancellor, called me up and he said, Annie, we need you to come to a luncheon. And there'll be a lot of your friends there, like a bunch of the developers and the bank presidents, and will you come? It'll be the week before you start with us. And I said, sure. And I walked in the room, and there was Tom Cousins and, you know, all the bank presidents, the people that you work with in economic development, because they were the people that could help shape and make your deals, the ones with enlightened self-interest. And in the middle of the luncheon, they were going around and introducing people, and the chancellor said, well, I will introduce Annie. This is Steve Porch. And he said, she's coming to work with us. She's going to pioneer this role. No other state system has had anybody to focus on economic development for all of their colleges and universities. She started up several 501c3s, and she's going to do one for us. She's going to start up a foundation for the Board of Regents. And through that, this is what you guys are going to be. We want you to be on her board. And Annie, you will do that, won't you? And I went, okay. So I got pro bono support from major law firms and the banks, and that's when I learned how, boy, I read the Riot Act by the persons that were head of UGA's foundation, Georgia Tech's chairman of the board of their foundation, Kennesaw's person. Man, they called me up, what do you mean? What are you doing this for? And I said, you know what? I accepted this job, and I think it's a good idea. You're going to benefit in the long run. I'm not going to go after. I need you to teach me who you go to for your money, because I won't go to them. I'll go to the national foundations, and because this money will help you send your students for international scholarships, because Georgia, only 2% of our students went abroad to study, and part of your education was to go somewhere else. So that was a growth opportunity. But the first day on the job, they rolled in 8 boxes of files, and I said, what is this? And they said, well, there's other duties as assigned. There's not anybody that's been responsible for, in 3 years, to coordinate with each campus on continuing education. And I said, I don't know anything about that. And they said, well, you'll figure it out. Man, I was ticked, because I felt had, you know. I came in for one job, all right, I got another one on here, and they're adding this third one on. I just felt so put out, and steam was probably coming out of my ears when the guy that was head of public service and outreach at UGA, Gene Yance, walked in to see the new person in this job. And just, you know, you don't want to put down your new, and I was not going to walk away from that opportunity to create something fresh, but I was ticked. That just was not right. And he said, you know what, there's somebody you need to meet. And I'm going to set up lunch. He's 92, 93 years old. His name is Dr. J.W. Fanning, and he's the one who came up with Leadership Georgia. He's come up with so many things. He's figured out how to connect all the dots, and to make a long story short, I went over and had lunch with him. He met me on his walker. It's just him and me. He died several months later. But he said, Annie, you're not thinking about this right. You should welcome opportunities that you don't know anything about, because you can legitimately go in with great authenticity and say, you are an expert. I don't know anything about this. I need you to teach me about this and help me understand who you respect. It doesn't matter if you like them or not, but what do you really respect and what do you need? Find the needs and fill them, and that's success. So I swallowed my anger and welcomed the opportunity. But thanks to Dr. Fanning's wise advice, don't be angry. Consider obstacles to be opportunities, and problems are possibilities. And so that's sort of been a theme that I've been able to work on the rest of my life. My daughter used to say to me when opportunities would come up, Mom, you can't schedule opportunities. So as the opportunities presented themselves, I was just fortunate to be at the right place at the right time many times. So I'd like to share with you some of the things that we did for the university system. In 1995, when I joined, of course I had this new job of getting getting 34 very different institutions aligned, and you only have one chance to make a first impression. So I requested and was given wonderful support by Governor Miller to host a breakfast at the governor's mansion 3 months after I started. And I invited to that luncheon the 34 presidents of the institutions of the university system, top business leaders across the state, because fortunately I knew a lot of them from economic development, and also philanthropists. And we did with UGA's help, we did a facilitated discussion And we asked 3 open-ended questions about what's good about the university system, what could be better, and if we could do anything, what would that be? And so we were able to electronically, it was really bleeding edge stuff then, where we had a little laptop at every table. But as the comments were entered, and we promised the comments would not be attributed to anybody, so to get the freedom of what they wanted to say without politics involved, there was inputted at each table, and it immediately went up on a big screen so you could see what people were saying all over the ballroom. And it was electronically captured, and we were able to give people a printout as they left of what they said. And then we were able to use qualitative research methods to discern what were the themes that emerged from that. And that was really sort of a work plan for me. It also helped us get going on the foundation efforts, and then we were going right into to the Olympics. And so some of the planning for the Olympics with Georgia Power, we had been able to send training teams to our campuses. That was a wonderful leg up to help bring money into campuses. But so it was exhilarating. And just as the Olympics were over and we were catching our breath again, and I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I blend together what everybody's doing? A knock came to my door, and the chancellor said, okay, Annie, you got it's your responsibility. There's at stake 1,200 jobs, high-end IT jobs that are going to go wherever the workforce, the educated workforce could be. And it's Georgia's to lose. It's Total Systems out of Columbus, Georgia. They have a hard time recruiting IT people there, and so they've thrown it up for a national competition. And Tennessee's onto it, blah, blah. I mean, all the states were really, 1,200 jobs that were good paying jobs and non-polluting. Everybody wanted those. So I took a delegation. I decided to take the Mayo Clinic approach, like I would do in economic development, and I took a select group of faculty members from 8 universities that had really special capacity in this area, including Kennesaw and Georgia Tech and Georgia College. And anyway, we went down, and I had the client sit in the middle of the room and say, this is what we need. And like Mayo, where they surround you with experts, so you get a quick, instead of being schlepped from doctor to doctor and school to school, we got it in one catch. And when they were describing what they needed, the Georgia Tech professor said, you know, we quit teaching that sort of thing years ago. There's no way, I mean, we are not going to be a part of such a backwards thing. And I kicked him under the table. The customer's always right. The client is right. And these could be great jobs. And to make a long story short, as a result, we created something called ICAP, or Intellectual Capital Partnership Program, which was to expedite the education of knowledge workers. And an Intellectual Capital Partnership Program meant it would be public dollars matched with private dollars. And it was sort of modeled off of Georgia's very successful Quick Start. Quick Start trains people, though, and lets the company select from a trained workforce for their needs. And I thought, no, that's too expensive. The company's got to pick people that will work well with their culture. They've got to make that investment first. And then they've got to be admittable to our institutions. We're not going to take unqualified people. So it's a geeing and hawing of meeting needs, both needs. And we were able to go to the state and I thought this was a particularly cool thing, work cancelable loans for the people that if they went through this program and they were hired by Total Systems, they got to go get a degree in a very expedited time. They go to school from 8 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, but they had a scholarship that paid for tuition, books, fees, and living expenses, because it was such a compressed time that if they left the state, well, they could work for anybody. They were not going to necessarily have to work for Total Systems. They could work for anybody because there was such a high need for these kind of highly educated IT people. If they didn't if Total Systems didn't pay well, somebody else was going to compete and pay well. We were not going to lose. But if they left the state of Georgia, they'd have to pay us back that scholarship plus interest. So we were not going to lose money. We were going to make money. And everybody bought into it. And we only, in the first class, I think we only had 2 people that left the state, but they had to pay it back, and we didn't lose any money. But I decided to introduce a third eye to see what the return on the investment was. And I hired Don Radachek, who was at Georgia State, to come in and independently audit it. And Business Week at the time said he was the most accurate economist in the country. So he discerned that always the return on investment. He said that if you take away the capital investment, which was $100 million, which was huge, and you just took the people that were well educated, that were making $20,000 a year, and they were going to $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year, the return on investment for the state of Georgia, with all the training cost in, was 15 to 1. And I thought, dadgum, that's great. I feel good as a citizen of Georgia that there's that kind of investment going on. And think about the lives that are impacted. And then we began it was successful. Georgia secured that announcement. It was the largest investment in the Southeast, according to the Wall Street Journal. And we started getting on the map. And eventually the White House recognized us. Al Gore, vice president, flew in, and they took that story, and I was invited to go to Washington to, on behalf of Georgia and the Total Systems people, to talk about what we did. That was a different way of approaching a well-educated workforce. ICAP was expanded. My dream came true for Hayhira, Georgia. There was a little software company by the name of Gold Leaf Technologies in Hayhira. It was developed by the biggest tobacco farmer in Georgia, who had started a software company to keep his Northwestern educated son there, and they were doing software for back of the house services so community banks could have the same sort of processes that the big banks were offering. And they were picking up clients right and left, but they needed IT people. And the Chamber of Commerce people from Valdosta and the president of Valdosta State called me in, and I went down and listened, and we gave them an ICAP grant to expedite the education of people in that area. And so Hayhira, where I dreamed about bringing an industrial project, we actually brought a very high-end project, and it helped redo the downtown of Hayhira, where these deserted office buildings, 2-story brick buildings from the turn of the century around the railroad tracks, they became these very cool places for the IT computer jocks to hang out. And people made much better money than they would have. One day, probably about a year later, I was working on projects in Atlanta, and I got a phone call from the reporter of the Valdosta Times who said, okay, need a quote. A big company in Atlanta bought the assets of Gold Leaf Technologies, and they're moving the company to Atlanta. So what do you have to say about that? And I said, well, I haven't heard from the company, so I want to hear that verified from them. But my first response is, these people don't have to leave Valdosta and Hayhira. There's plenty of jobs for them because everybody needs these kind of educated workers. And I thought, boy, I got jammed on that one. But at the end of the day, it was a good move. We were able to provide money to Gulfstream to retrain certain engineers into the IT function. And, the world's most important little jets are coming right out of there. We did stuff with Kennesaw State. And I learned about faculty innovations and not. Somehow, well, I ended up working with Kennesaw State in doing some projects, thanks to Betty Siegel, where I wanted to track what economists were thinking. And I hired a young professor by the name of Roger Teterow to help me work with community bankers to be an early warning system about where the economy was going and what kind of workforce educated workforce was needed. And we had done a series of projects with a variety of groups that were sort of a bellwether approach to understanding what universities and colleges could do. But the Dean of Science and Mathematics, Dr. Larry Peterson, called me one day and he asked if he could come down and see me. And I don't know him, but he came down and he was somebody who had come out of industry, had been in the pharmaceutical industry. And so he had a very different approach to the role of what higher ed was, a much more pragmatic, not just an Ivy-covered world approach. And he had a bunch of ideas, and one of which was how could we better connect our universities and in creating entrepreneurs and understanding needs and helping to create entrepreneurial movements. And so we were able to give some contracts, different contracts, to help grow his idea. And other universities got jealous, like Georgia Tech and UGA, and they grabbed that ball. But it was Kennesaw was always, you talk about leadership, Kennesaw was always an innovator. It was just exhilarating to watch the growth of that institution from a couple of thousand as a two-year school to a very much respected national player. ICAP had several other aspects to it, but a thing that changed the course of my life was Tom Daniel, and the chancellor came and said, "Annie, we need you to go work with the legislature. There's a new chairman of the Senate Higher Education Committee. It's a first-time leadership role for him. He's really bright. We think he's going somewhere, but he's very tight. His name is Senator Sonny Perdue. And we need you to go over and meet with his committee and tell them why we're relevant, and they need to keep investing in us." So I looked to see who was on the committee. It was a great group of old white men that I had known from my DOT days. So I thought, how can I capitalize on Don Radachek's in a way that translates to them? My son had broken his leg, and I was trying to keep him occupied, so I went to the bank, got 15 fresh $1 bills, and I said, "William, I need you to tape these end to end and do a perfect job." And he did that because he loved money. That was easy to get him to do that. We rolled it up really tight, and I went to the meeting over in the state capitol. Walked into this conference room about this size, and I went right over to Senator Perdue, and I said, "Senator, I'm here to present a story, but I need your help. Do you have $1 on you?" And I did not know how tight he was at that time, but I said, "Just give me $1 and I'll show you what you get back from it." So he stands up, he gives me a $1 bill, and I said, "Okay, for every $1 you give the University System of Georgia for programs like ICAP, this is what you get back." And I took that, and I said, "You hold this." And we stretched out 15 $1 bills in a row, and their eyes just got like saucers. And I said, "So every $1 you invest in this program, you get 14 more that you can put into other things like hospitals and schools and, security issues. And so I think you need to invest more in us." And it worked. It worked. We were able, in the tenure while I was there, we were able to attract 100 million net new dollars into the university system. It was both public dollars and private dollars that were coming from philanthropy, and also the companies that we serve, because nobody respects something you get for free. You got to have skin in the game, and ICAP afforded that. And I would like to say, not many people know this, I registered ICAP, Intellectual Capital Partnership Program, and against, the lawyers didn't want me to do it, but I went back to the lawyers that had done free work for us. I said, "Help me do this," because I thought, intellectual capital is the business capital of the future, and we got that tagline. A couple of years in, I got a notice from somebody in Arizona that Microsoft had a new program called ICAP that they were trying to use. And because you know how higher ed networks are, and I got notified of it, and I got our attorneys on it, and Microsoft had to back off because we own that. We own that. It is subsequently, the program has died. I'm not sure why. I was gone to Virginia for a while, but Quick Start's still going, and it's the #1 training program. But I think, I'm hopeful Steve Wrigley, who's the chancellor now, will be innovative and bold. He is very strategic, and I hope they do something. along those lines. That kind of brings me to the next segment. When a fellow by the name of Sonny Perdue got elected governor, I think it shocked the world. Now, I have never given to any gubernatorial campaign except when I was a student at Stevens. Never, because my roles were public servant jobs, and I was not going to get into the politics of all that. I needed to get along with everybody, and I did. I worked with all the governors. But when Sonny Perdue got elected, he had been sending his children to me for advice. I said, I don't know, Jack, about how to place your kids, but I'll be glad to work with them. Helped one at Kennesaw in particular. And I thought, these are fine kids. And got to know him a little bit that way. And as he went through his leadership roles, you still, you work with people across the aisle. He sent word to me that he wanted me to come join his administration. I thought, I don't want to do that. I like what I'm doing. I'm not real interested in. But I went to my boss, the chancellor, and said, okay, here's what he said. Oh, Annie, we want to loan you. I'm not going to let you go be his employee, but I will loan you as Board of Regents to be. It was fun. It was policy, which meant budget, state budget, the legislature, and executive appointments. So the chancellor had vested interest because the regents came through that process. And so I was loaned to do that for the first Republican governor in 170 years, or some big batch of time. And it was a time of huge transition, both budgetarily, because 9/11 had happened and state budgets had fallen really short, a couple of billion dollars short, and states cannot spend beyond. So I was definitely engaged from a budgetary, what do you cut? Do you cut pulling people's teeth or giving them, a leg? What do you cut? And then I started thinking, Sonny Perdue is a steward. He takes a stewardship mentality to things, and went to him with a proposal that he do a commission for a New Georgia, use the name he was already using, but assemble 22 CEOs that would come meet once a quarter at the governor's mansion for breakfast, and have a series of discrete task forces that were headed up by a CEO. Long story short, we were able to secure pro bono help from all of the major consulting firms because they didn't have work. And I went to them and said, loan me some of your experts and they'll get exposed to CEOs, and I can't pay you, but your taxes won't go up if we can find money to save money in Georgia. My co-chairs were Joe Rogers of Waffle House, who really has a different world view of things. And then Bob Hatcher, who is brilliant, just a brilliant banker who'd been head of BB&T, but he's subsequently built up and sold off a national banking thing. And we had 22 CEOs. They were glad to say I've been to the governor's mansion for breakfast and got to talk to the governor this morning. But when they came to their sessions, every quarter, I had 3 task forces report in. Each one was led by a CEO and staffed by these consultants. So in my tenure, we did 16 task forces. I guess the best way to do it is to give you an example. You can't manage what you don't know. And I knew from my DOT days and my Georgia Power days that the state of Georgia had a huge fleet, but we had no idea what was in that fleet. We didn't know how many cars we owned. We didn't know how many trucks, planes, all of that. It was, I learned that from my budget days and DOT days and, all those different experiences. I had been one of the people involved behind the scenes with helping to recruit UPS's headquarters to town, and gotten to know Mike Eskew a little bit. And we went to them and I said, could you please loan us 2 top executives for 3 months? You guys are the best at managing fleets in the world. And just 3 months, need you to help us figure out how to organize ourselves and figure out what we got and what we don't have and figure out how to surplus. To make a long story short, you have to visualize the Atlanta Braves stadium filled up with surplus cars and trucks from around the state of Georgia that we sold at auction. And we actually sold a King Air on eBay, and that captured a lot of money. Over time, we were able to save $700 million, find $700 million in getting rid of assets we didn't need. And we were also able to carve $3 billion out of the budget. And that kept us among the very few states that kept our bond ratings, and that was exhilarating to me. But in the middle of all of that, I decided, boy, I'm learning a lot about politics. Purdue had made a commitment to me that I did not have to go to any political stuff. I didn't want to be an R or a D. My life has been built on focusing on the best qualified people. I don't care about Democrats or Republicans. I do. They're my friends. But and he had committed to me that I did not have to go to those kinds of things. But I decided, boy, I've enjoyed about all I can. And people like Betty Siegel had come to me and offered me jobs. And they said, you need to go get your doctorate. And I thought, well, I can get a free doctorate if I go back through the university system. I could go to Georgia State or Georgia Tech or UGA. So I went to go see what kind of, and to progress in higher ed, you need that green card of the doctorate. So long story short, at UGA, they said, we'll be glad to take you. You'll have to move over here. And I'm thinking, I can't do that. I cannot do that. And they said, do not tell anybody, but there is a fantastic program at the University of Pennsylvania where Wharton is combined with the Graduate School of Education, and it's about the money of higher ed, and it's distinctive in the country. It's an executive doctorate, and they only have a small cohort. And to make a long story short, I was very lucky, and I was in the 4th cohort. My colleagues were from all over the country. I was only Southerner, so I was sort of the token Southerner, but it was exhilarating. I was given scholarships, wonderful scholarships, and I was able to do the commission for New Georgia on the side and not be in conflict with any of my jobs, which is really important to me. So one thing leads to another. One of my professors was selected to be the president of Oglethorpe University, and throughout my tenure of working for the university system, I never had any experience on a campus. And everybody, like Betty Siegel, were saying, it's very different on the campus. You got to understand that so you can be better at what you're doing in these other roles. So I got permission from the chancellor. He was really kind to say, okay, we will give you a 2-year leave of absence. And so I went to work for my professor at Oglethorpe University as associate provost to run the evening degree program, which was adult learners, which I saw a lot of need for people that needed to have new skill sets as the economy kept evolving, and to work on my doctorate too. And long story short, and I was supposed to introduce him to the community, and did that. It was an extraordinary experience, and we got a return on investment in the first 18 months of 23 to 1, because you take a really good program and you tighten it up and you market it well. I said, we're a Nordstrom. We have a Nordstrom market. You can go to a public institution and get your degree at night, and that's more like going, well, it's tacky to say, Target. But I said, we're more the Nordstrom approach, and we can provide certain scholarships. And it worked, and we brought in a lot of money to this private school, and I saw the private side of higher ed. And then the university system said, okay, 2 years up, we want you to consider doing something that kind of builds on everything you've done, and that is go work with Dan Ron, who was president of the Medical College of Georgia, and he was also a vice chancellor for health, because health was really becoming quite the educated workforce issue. And I had, on a personal basis, I'd been living a life of our firstborn had a serious neurological issue. She had a seizure disorder that began when she was 14, and it had taken us on some uncharted paths. She was brave as she could be, Virginia Vale Burriss. When 8 medicines did not hold her seizure disorder, but she was super bright. She got her brains from her daddy, not from me. She was great in math, 1 percentile in math. We were able to figure out that she was a good candidate for surgeries, and we went to Yale, and we were there about 3 months total. And so we saw brain mapping. She had 2 really long surgeries, but she was given a wonderful opportunity to, she had to learn how to walk, talk, and all that again when they resectioned part of the frontal right, but I learned a lot about the brain and brain functions and how that affects people's performance. And I just got into medicine. So I had the opportunity to go help. UGA wanted their own med school, and of course med schools are the most expensive things on the planet besides engineering schools, and so they asked me to work to help put together a deal for UGA to have a partnership campus with Medical College of Georgia instead of UGA starting their own. Tons of politics, you don't want to hear any of that. It was excruciating. But at the end of the day, using economic development matrices and also the network that I knew, we were able to help put campuses, clinical campuses, around the state where we really needed doctors to go to. Savannah, Albany in particular, and Rome, Georgia. And we were able to put an expansion class at UGA and work it. My training at Penn was perfect because I had learned all about all the different nuances of higher education. What, the cultural wars that exist between a land grant and a public health institution. And my dissertation was on how Georgia Tech and Emory collaborated to create this world-class, now #1 biomedical engineering program in the world. Anyway, all my passions were aligning with that, and it was a great opportunity. And the goal then, and we're achieving it, was to increase the number of physicians in Georgia by 20% by 2020. And we're on track. We're doing it. And we've done it with class, and we've done it with, meeting all the certifications that are needed. So that was pretty cool until Jenny died. I had just gotten my doctorate, and actually 2011 was a horrible year. 11 people in my family died, and it just was bizarre. Some of them were at the right age, but many were not. My daughter was 27, and it was totally unexpected, though I had the great comfort of, it was a massive seizure that took her out. But the night before, she had called me and said, Mom, I just had one of the best days of my life. She was a teacher, and all of her students had done well, and I will not go into all of that, but many parents don't have that opportunity. They thought I had cancer. They removed my right colon. It turned out, in hindsight, that was a blessing because it took me out of the world for 2.5 months. I had tons of leave because I've always had good health. Then I had to have a second surgery to repair some issues. It was an excruciating time in life. And in that time period, I worked for 3 presidents in 5 years. Just a host of changes, all brilliant men. The last one really prepared me for Trump, the way constant change. So I really, in the spring of 2012, I was home recuperating from the second surgery, and I really, in my prayer life, I said, just take me. I've had a wonderful life. I've had so many great opportunities, but this is not good. And out of the blue, a friend called me from Virginia, who I knew from Georgia Tech. She was now working up there. And my daughter had used to babysit her daughters. And she said, what are you doing? I said, I'm just praying to go. And she said, you can't do that. There's a job up here that's got your name written all over it. and I need your resume. And I said, I don't have a resume. I hadn't done one in 20 years. I've just been lucky. People have come. And she said, well, you have 2 days to get this done. They're down to 2 finalists. And this is perfect for you. It's everything you've ever done, and you can do well on this job. And it would give you and Woody a fresh start. And to make a long story short, it was the opportunity to become CEO of the George Mason University's Prince William campus, which was a research campus that needed a strategic focus. And I never thought I'd leave Georgia. I love Georgia. But we thought, okay, we're going to go. And it was wonderful. We sold our home, which is where Woody had found our daughter. He just did not need to be there anymore. And our son was graduating from college, and he came and joined us. And he had a great opportunity to live with us in faculty housing. We were all very tight and close at that point. But he got to work for Johnny Isakson, Senator Isakson, and then he went to work for Congressman David Scott. See, he wanted to see the real world, the scope of it. And Woody retired and was very supportive of me. And I was able to find out my skill sets were transferable. We were able to do a strategic realignment. I worked with 7 deans to get their programs on my campus, and including all the biomed stuff, and we got a huge Department of Defense grant to expedite the education of physicians. And I had a bioterrorism unit. It was right next to the FBI real operating headquarters at my campus, and I got to see Amazon's iCloud stuff. It was exhilarating. And to be in DC, boy, it's a different thing. It is a totally different thing. But I was lucky that I was able to work with the governor and the 2 U.S. senators, and we were able to secure quickly federal money and state money. And we got done in 3 years what I thought was going to take us 5 years. And the president of the university called me in, and he said, Annie, I need you to come and raise money. And you're good with CEOs, and our budgets are getting cut back because of the Great Recession, and the federal money is subsiding, so that's what I need you to do now. And I said, I don't do that. He said, no, you started up this foundation for the system. I said, I made my brother sell my Girl Scout cookies. I don't do that. And he said, this is what I need you to do now. So I went in to do that, and I learned some things about the foundation I was not at all comfortable with, and timing is everything. We kept trying to buy houses. Every house that we put an offer on and we were doing due diligence, 3 of them fell through. And then William comes home, and he said, I've always wanted to be in the Peace Corps. I've applied, and they've already accepted me. I'm going to Morocco in September. And we were dealing with that, and there was a big snowstorm, and 33 inches of snow fell in our McLean, Virginia, and I could not open a single door to get out of my house. And I said, Woody, nobody retires to the north. I think it's time to think about going home. I had honored my obligations, and so we did. And we came back to, he did not want to be in Atlanta. Atlanta has changed a great deal. The transportation is, I'm glad I know the cardiovascular system of Atlanta through transportation. I understand a lot of the assets, but we chose to live in Madison, Georgia, because it's really part of a triangle, a biomedical triangle. You got Atlanta with great universities. That's an hour away, exactly 55 miles from my house to the state capitol. You're 30 minutes from UGA, the land grant, and it's 70 miles to Augusta with a medical college. So we had family there and began anew, and I had it in my mind's eye. I wanted to focus in on things that I had discovered through my daughter's medical journeys and what I had learned from the campus, the microbiome in particular. We had one of the leading centers for proteomics and microbiome in the country at my campus in Virginia. And so I thought, I think I'd like to start up a company with that. So that would be Act 3. And I began doing my homework and talked to people that had been great mentors and friends and advisors. And I thought, I'm going to go head over and renew my acquaintances at MCG. The new dean of the School of Medicine is just fabulous. He himself had done a telemedicine company and spun it out, Reach. David Hess is just, he's one of my favorite people on the planet. So I'm going over to see him, and I thought, I'm going to call Dr. Shi, who had become a good friend, Zhang Shi, Georgia Research Alliance eminent scholar. In fact, when I left Georgia, he had brought in, he was the highest performing research professor in the Georgia Research Eminent Scholars. I came to find out that over time he had brought in over $100 million of funded research. He's internationally renowned for his diabetes research. And so I called him to see how he's doing, because actually I tried to steal him to Virginia at one point, but he loved where he was at MCG. And so I called to see how his kids were as I was driving over, and he said, well, can you and I get together after you see Dean Hess? And I said, sure. So David loaned me his conference room, and we were catching up on kids, and he said, you remember before you left here I asked you to be CEO of one of my companies, and you turned me down? And I said, yeah, it wasn't the right time or place. And he said, well, I've got another one, and I want you to do that. And to make a long story short, I said, I don't want to do that. I want to do what I'm doing. And he said, well, I could help you with that. But he's developed these really leading edge diagnostics, biomarkers for kidney disease and diabetes, which is a huge global market. But also what's really interesting is cancer. So go back to the American Cancer Society, and everybody on my mother's side dies of cancer, so including my late brother, who died 3 weeks after my daughter. It's just, I said, okay. And then, so I engaged a group of people on his behalf, have created a board, and we've been going after money. This university's given us $1 million it's really his money. Higher ed money is very different than business money and government money and philanthropic money. So I feel fortunate to understand all those pieces. We've been working on marketing. My job is marketing and money. And so that's helped me re-engage back with Georgia Bio. I'm back on the board with that. There's some really exciting initiatives to make Georgia and Atlanta a world-class, a health innovation hub, building on those same things from the past, the CDC, great research universities. But we now have bioinformatics. Baxter and Shire helped work on before leaving. There's just a lot of neat pieces that still can come together. And I think health is, Georgia, if there's a future, a great business base to grow on, you keep building on our IT base that we've had. The fintech, we are exquisite in that, but biotech is, that's nano, there's a lot of things I'm real jazzed about. It's not just what we've got, it's the sum of the whole that is so impressive. We've got a lot of neat parts, but if they could be effectively linked up, I think it's a bright future. Georgia will never, at this present day and age, we will not be accused of being the healthiest state in the country. But I think it's a great aspirational goal. Why not? Why not aim for being the healthiest state? It would lessen state expenses for health care. There's a whole host of things. If we could bring talent where people are healthy and feeling good, well, I guess I would go back to my grandmother, who said, health is the first wealth. And I'm still interested, in this Act 3 on the business equation. I would like to do well by doing good. And I can't think of a better way to do that than to help the citizens of my community, my state, my country, my world. And it's sort of like, hey, Howard, Georgia, I couldn't have imagined what the opportunities were. And I think there are a lot of things, if you can create effective linkages of business that makes the money, government that is a steward of the infrastructure, academia that grows the talent pool, and philanthropy that kind of bridges a lot of things. I think we're on the verge of a really exciting time.